Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. This is GlugNet's September meeting. For those who may not know me, my name is Stephen Ball. I'm the event coordinator. A few housekeeping items before we get started here. As I mentioned before, this event is being recorded and it will be up on YouTube. We'll send that link out once we have it. Following the presentation, there will be a survey to give Chris, our presenter, some feedback. It's completely anonymous. We appreciate all the feedback you give us. In addition, we'll have one license of JetBrains to give away tonight. That's good for a free year of perpetual upgrades. So if you haven't won one of those recently, I highly recommend entering the drawing for that. Tonight's speaker, Chris Miller, is a Microsoft MVP, a Xamarin Certified Mobile Developer for iOS and Android, and the leader of the TechValley.net user group. He is a book and Pluralsight author with several courses available for Xamarin.Forms. Chris has been developing on various platforms for way too long to detail, but currently works and writes about C# programming using Microsoft and Xamarin tools. For the last decade or so, Chris has worked for Tyler Technologies in school transportation market. And tonight he will be talking to us about how to access native features using Xamarin.Forms. So take it away, Chris.
All right, welcome to Native Features Xamarin.Forms, when you have to get closer to the metal. I'm Chris Miller. I'm a software architect for Tyler Technologies. I'm working in the K-12 transportation market. Basically, we do school bus routing software. I can be reached on Twitter as Another Lab. I blog at rajpet.com. I'm on GitHub, LinkedIn, Stack Overflow, the usual places. Just a brief shout out to my own company. We are hiring. Tyler Technologies does software and services for the public sector. We have offices across North America, most in the US, but some in Canada. We have about 5,000 employees, a quarter of which are developers. We made Forbes Best Employers for Diversity list in 2019. Up until COVID, we'd grown every quarter since fourth quarter of 2010. I don't know what the numbers are now. I know we're doing good business this year, but I don't know if we've been growing. So we have positions open across the country at tylertech.com/careers. If you have any questions about something involving Tyler or any position, please email me at chris.miller@tylertech.com. Shameless plug for myself. I do have 3 Pluralsight courses. The session you're seeing tonight is a very abbreviated version of one that was just released a month ago, which is working with native features in Xamarin.Forms. I also have a course on Shell and one on localization. And I also have an A-Press book that is slowly getting out of date, which is how to do localization with Xamarin.Forms. So let's get into it. Native features. Well, what are native features? Hardware-specific stuff like the camera, keyboard, sensors, external devices. OS-specific stuff like a photo gallery, messaging, email, permissions. And device metrics like, are you a phone? Are you a tablet? How big are you? These are native features in terms of what we'll be talking about tonight. So how do we get access to native features? Xamarin.Forms gives you most of what you need, but sometimes you need to go a little bit deeper. So we're going to start off with Xamarin Essentials. It's the first thing to check when you're doing anything with native features because it usually has the stuff that you need. When you create a new Xamarin project, you get Xamarin Essentials added by default. It is part of Xamarin. It's fully supported and can be used with both Forms and Xamarin native projects. Quick tip. If you need to do anything with native features, check Xamarin Essentials first. You don't want to reinvent the wheel if someone else has already done so. And it's an ongoing project. They're continuously adding new features to it. Just to give a quick shout out to Essentials, if you've never used it before, here's just a brief list of all the stuff that it has. Tons and tons of stuff with documentation on how to use it. So where did it come from? Well, it started out as plugins for Xamarin, which was just a collection of individual plugin libraries started by James Montemagno, and became a community project, and eventually grew so big that they just renamed it to Xamarin Essentials and became an official part of Xamarin, and then unified the API. And where did my mouse go? Sorry. So what comes with Xamarin Essentials? You get all these different things. You get, working with threads, permissions, geocoding, preferences, barometer, just about the typical sensors. Gyroscope, sharing, phone dialing, detecting shaking. So if you want if you want code that basically clears something by shaking the phone, you can easily do that with Essentials. Platform extensions, converters, flashlight, launcher, so you can launch other applications that have registered URLs with the operating system. But there's a ton of stuff. So how do you use Xamarin Essentials? Well, if you create a new project, you get it by default. If you don't, you just add the NuGet package Xamarin.Essentials. And then you add the platform setup code and permissions, which is usually just like a handful of lines that go into, excuse me, main activity.cs or app-delegate.cs. And then you add a reference to Xamarin Essentials to any class that references an API from Essentials. And then you call the API. So let's do a quick demo and we'll just dive right into it. Let's see. Let's make PowerPoint go away for a second. And we'll bring up Visual Studio, which is already up on the screen. We're just going to create a new Xamarin project. Whoop. Come on. And we'll create a mobile app. Call app 3, because that's what we're currently working with. And call create. New mobile app, we'll select the template. We'll just use the typical shell one. That's fine. And we have our project. First thing I'll do is make sure the NuGet stuff is being updated. It's restoring. Come on, come on, come on. And manage NuGet packages for solution. So you can see we created some Xamarin Essentials is already installed with it. We can update forms. We don't really need to for this project, so we'll save a little time by not updating it. And first thing to do, just to show you what it looks like, I'm just going to run it, compile it. Now we'll do Android first, because that will take the longest to compile. If anyone has any questions, please interrupt me at any time. I see Stephen his mic's still live. So if you post something in chat and I don't see it, Stephen will take a look at it and he'll let me know.
Definitely.
The fun thing about doing anything with Xamarin.Forms is always going to be that little brief pause while we compile and run. And let me see. So we'll just, out of the box, the app you get by using the template already uses something with Xamarin Essentials. I'll just show you that quickly, and then we'll add something to it if it eventually comes up. Always the slow part with the demo is just doing the initial build. And my emulator is coming up, so that's a good sign. It means it compiled successfully. All right, so this is your basic demo. And when you click Learn More, it's going to fire off it's going to just basically say open up this URL. nothing fancy. So we can shut down, and we'll just show you exactly what it did. And that would be in our About page. Come on, here we go. All right, so what we did was we clicked the button, and it was bound to this command, Open Web command, which is defined in our view model. So let's jump right over to our view model. And it's very simple. It's bound to a new command, await browser, open async, and then the URL. So this browser comes from the Xamarin Essentials browser. So we're going to just add a couple more fields to this. And what we're going to do is add some code they'll use the geocoding API from Xamarin Essentials. So the first thing I want to do is add a couple fields. So we're going to have an address and location. Missing location. Come on, go back to me, mouse. So basically, when they type, the user will type in an address, and then after they press the geo command button, we'll geocode it and get the lat long and display it in location. So what we'll do here is wire up our geocode command. The new command. It's async, because why wouldn't it be? And we'll just got a little more work to do. So our locations equals await geocoding get locations async the address. So this will come back with one or more items that will just be locations that came back from the geocoding. If the address is vague enough, it could come up with more than one. Like if you typed White House, you'd get 1600 Pennsylvania, and you could possibly get other places also named White House. So if, oh, sorry, missed a line here. If for this demo, we only care about the first one. So first location equals locations dot first or default. So if first location not equal null, location, which is our view model property, will equal dollar, let's say latitude will be first location dot latitude. So you can see right here, we get the different fields that are coming back. We have latitude, we have longitude, we have altitude, timestamp, which would be when it got it from the GPS, and accuracy. When you're getting the geocoding is based on the GPS of the device, and on a mobile phone, you have different sources for GPS information. You have an actual GPS chip, which can send information back. If it can't get a lock on a satellite, it will try to get it from a triangulation based on the cell tower, and then finally from IP address. It'll try to make its best guess that way, and that will affect the accuracy you'll get. So meanwhile, we're going to show latitude. Longitude will equal first location dot longitude. And that should take care of our view model once I put semicolon at the end, excuse me. And now we can add that to, we'll save that. And now we can add that to our view, which I should still have open. And we'll stick this below that. And Boom. So first thing we do, we're adding an entry field. We're going to bind it to address, put a placeholder field. Then we'll have our button, which will be bound to the geocode command we just created. And then we'll have a label, which will be bound to location. And if I did this correctly, it should work. Let's fire this sucker up. Come on. Okay, so if we enter an address, I'll enter my home address. And now I gotta hide the keyboard so I can see the button. Press geocode. And boom, it came back with the latitude and longitude. So if I put it in someplace else, whoop, went back too far. Let's bring that up again. Let's try that again. I don't think I found anything. Whoop. A little bit fast. Let's try that again. Actually, I think I can just type White House. It should give us something. Yep, we got the lat and longitude of the White House. Alrighty, so just to prove this works for everybody, we're going to fire this up also on iOS. Set the starter project. And let's just make sure that I'm still connected to iOS. And yes, cool. Boom, boom, boom. And there'll be a brief delay while this compiles and deploys to the iOS emulator. So while we're waiting for this to compile, does anyone have any questions about what we just did? Come on. Where did my simulator go? Built succeeded, but didn't actually run it. No, that's not nice. Here we go. And we have the same screen. And we'll type in White House. Boom. And there you have it. This is the cool thing. If you ever need to geocode or reverse geocode anything, both platforms do it. They do it differently. The nice thing about using Essentials, you don't have to worry about that. You can just use the same one set of code and it'll work for both. And let's go back to our demo. So let's talk a little bit about the device class. Device class gives you device metrics, platform, and idiom checking. So platform would be the operating system. Idiom would be, is it a phone? Is it a tablet? Is it a desktop? And so forth. And you can check it in both XAML and in C#. And it also provides helper functions for doing async and background code. Now, is one of the areas where it duplicates async and background code methods that are available in just regular Xamarin and Essentials. There's like more than one way to do this. So for platform check, with C#, you would check device.runtime platform. It'll come back with an enumerated type of Android, iOS, UWP, WPF, macOS, others, like Tizen or other ones that have been added. With XAML, you'd use on platform and on for checking. So here we have some sample code. This would be using if you wanted to set an image and you wanted to set the image based on what operating system it was. So you would check device.runtime platform. If the device was iOS or UWP, our file would be a resource named logo.png. If it was Android, we'd be using logo.xml, which meant we were using an Android vector file. And then you would set the logo image to image source from file, logo file. Now to do it with XAML, use image source, and then you do on platform. You have to specify the type arguments of what you want, which in this case is image source. And then on platform, iOS or UWP, the value is logo.png. If the platform is Android, the value is logoa.xml. An alternative way of doing that would be to set image source equals on platform, logo.png, which is the default. And then for Android, it's logo.xml. For iOS, it's logoi.png. So idiom check. In C#, it's device.idiom. It'll come back with desktop, phone, table, TV, or watch. And XAML use on idiom. So why this is important? If you have code that's going to be different between the iPhone and the iPad, you need to know what the operating system is, and you need to know what the idiom is. So if you're doing it in code, you can say device.idiom is target idiom.phone. We're going to set our main page to be a page called phone page. If the idiom is tablet, then we would set our main page to be tablet page, and so forth with desktop. And you can eventually drop through to an error page if something comes up that you couldn't quite handle. So in XAML, if you want to set the width of a column based on what you're running on, we're going to say on idiom with a type argument of grid length. If it's a tablet, we want the column to be 100 units wide. If it's phone, it's 50. And there's a shorter version of doing that as well. We can just say column definition width equals on idiom 250 is the default, phone is 75, tablet's 150. And let's talk a little bit about the background goodies. Begin invoke on main thread. If you're running multi-threaded code and you want to update anything on the UI, you need to use some version of begin invoke on main thread. Otherwise, you run the risk of just crashing your application. It's basically fire and forget. If you need to get back a task for invoking the main thread, you would use one of the variations of invoke on main thread async. And of course, you have device timer, which gives you a standard way of using the timer. So we're on a little sample code here. We're creating a new timer that'll go off every, I think 90 seconds. And it'll do something periodically. And then it's going to call device.begin invoke on main thread, and whatever that code it'll be, it's going to execute then. And finally, it'll return true to keep going. So if you want a timer that only executed once, you would set return to false here. So let's talk a little bit about dependency injection. It's where you define a shared interface. You're going to implement platform-specific code, and you're going to inject that code at runtime. And there's multiple ways of implementing it, of implementing dependency injection. Xamarin provides the dependency service class. It is part of Xamarin.Forms. It's a light form of dependency injection. It's very easy to implement, and does have some limitations. So how do you use it? Well, you create an interface, that'll be in your shared code, and then you implement that interface for each of the platforms. You don't necessarily have to have an implementation for every platform you have. If your app runs on multiple platforms and there are features that are only specific to one of those platforms, that's the only one you'd implement to. You either skip it for the other ones or implement some sort of dummy implementation that does nothing. Then you register the implementation, and that's handled at the platform. And then you resolve the implementation at runtime. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add that to our demo. So let me just make my presentation go away for a second. And and let's see. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to make the keyboard go away automatically. And to do that with Android, I'm going to need an extra NuGet plugin. I'm going to add that right now. Whoop, there we go. And we need one called plugin.currentActivity. What this plugin does, it gives you an easy way of getting access to the current activity in Android from your Xamarin.Forms code. Let's add that. It gives us some helpful hints. Basically, in the init method onCreate of main activity, we need to add this line, which is slightly incorrect, but you'll see when I put it in. So we go down to main activity, and boom. Of course, it's not called bundled, it's actually called saved instance save. And now we just need to tell main activity.cs that we're using this plugin. We don't need to do this for Android. This is only for, I'm sorry, we don't need to do this for iOS. We just need to do this for Android. So now I'm going to create an interface called keyboard helper that will define the method we're going to use to close the keyboard up at runtime. So I'm just going to create a new folder, interfaces, and we're going to add a new interface. My keyboard helper. Did I spell that the way I wanted it? Yes, I did. No, I did not. I did not want to call it keyboarder helper. Rename. And needs to be public. And we're just defining one method. Hide keyboard. So now that we have the interfaces, with the interface, we can define the implementation. So let's start with iOS and add class. Keyboard helper. It's a public class, and it implements our iKeyboard helper interface. So first thing we do, add our namespace and add our implementation, which obviously will be a little nicer than that. So under iOS, to hide the keyboard is pretty simple. its UI application, shared application key window, which is the active editing field, and editing true. That's pretty much all you need to do to hide it, but we do need to register our implementation. So for dependency service, we do that with an attribute. So it's assembly. Which of course wants a namespace. Assembly, colon, dependency, then type of, keyword helper. If you're doing dependency service and it doesn't work at runtime, the odds are you forgot this part and it wasn't registered. The way dependency service works, it uses the location pattern to find your implementations at runtime, and it does it through assembly attributes. Save that. So now we can add our Android version. Because I'm a lazy typist, I'll just copy and paste the name. Add our class, keyboard helper. It's again, public. It implements keyboard helper. Add our namespace for that. Define our implementation. We know we're going to need Xamarin.Forms. And there'll be a little more work here, and this is why we need the current activity. So the first thing we do to hide a keyboard is we need to get the input method manager in Android. And we get that from the context, and we're using the cross current activity. So let's add that plugin. And then we have the current activity, and we have the application context. And from that, we can get our input manager. Get our namespacing. Yellow mouse, there we go. So if we have an input manager, we say hide soft input window, which is the pop-up keyboard, a token for the current window, and the input flags to none. And that basically, that will hide it for us. Once again, we need to register this. So it's assembly, dependency, type of, app3droid, keyboard helper. Yay, we have everything. So we did the interface, we did the implementation, and we did the registration of the implementation. Now we'll show you how to access this at runtime. And now we go back to our view model. And what we're gonna do is when the user stops typing in an entry field, we're gonna hide the keyboard. So to do that, we're gonna use the timer. So under here, and then we'll add our timer event. All right, so let's add our fixes, system threading, That should take care of all these guys. Yay, 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 yay. So we have a reset timer. First time it gets called, it's going to be null. So it's going to create that with a timer callback. Otherwise, it will stop the timer and restart it. When it does fire off the event, it's going to call messaging center, hide keyboard, and reset the timer. And we'll show you how to implement that. First thing you got to do though is add reset timer to address. So anytime they type into the address field, we're going to be constantly resetting this timer. And it's going to send a message because we want to keep the UI separate from the backend code. So we're going to go to the About page. And in the onAppearing event, we're going to subscribe to that message. All right, get rid of the really white squiggly lines by adding our reference. So when it receives a hide keyboard message, it's going to use device.begin on main thread, dependency service get. Let's add our fix here. Let's add our interface. Hide keyboard. So this is how the dependency service works. You call get and you give it the type, and it's going to pick up whatever type whatever interface was registered, and use null coalescing. So if it fails, nothing will happen. And if I did this correctly, it should work on the first try. Let's compile. All right, so let's start typing. And boom, it's gone. So as long as I'm typing something, that timer is being constantly reset. But once I stop, after a couple seconds, it'll hide the keyboard. And that's how the dependency service works. Does anyone have any questions about this part? Cool. So let's stop this. There are other dependency injection libraries. There are plenty of them out there. There's AutoFact, Inject, Prism has one. There's TinyLOC, many of them out there. Microsoft has an easy one to use. It's called Microsoft.extensions.dependency injection. This is Microsoft's dependency injection container. It's part of the core framework. It comes with ASP.NET Core, but can be used separately. You can install via the .NET CLI or NuGet. You can do a .NET add package, Microsoft Extensions Dependency Injection, or install package, Microsoft.extensions.dependency injection. So how do you use it? Well, you create an interface, just like we did before. You implement the interface for each platform, basically just what we did before. You initialize the app service provider. This is a little different than the dependency server. So there's a little bit more work, not much more, but just a little bit more. And then you inject the implementation at runtime. So let's jump right in on that one. And we'll go back to our demo. So now we're going to add another feature. We're going to display we're going to display a toast message, pop-up message, when we hide the keyboard. And because I'm feeling a little bit lazy, I'm going to just toss this in the keyboard helper file, even though it's a different interface. So it'll be public interface toast message, and it'll be void show toast and the message we want to send, we want to display. So now we can work on our implementations. Since toast messages were started with Android, this will be an easy one to implement. So let's create a new class. Toast message. And it's public. And implements iToast message. So first thing we're going to do is get our namespace. And come on, here we go. Implement our interface. On Android, this is very easy to do. Toast. Make text. Application. Context. Comma. Text. Comma. Toast length. That long. And this part I always forget. You still got to tell it to show it. And that's all you need to do to make a pop-up message in Android. Toast, make toast. Text. I don't know why they didn't call it make toast, because it's be simpler. On iOS, it's a little more involved. Copy and paste class name, because I'm the laziest typer that you'll ever see. Add class. Public. And bring in the namespace. Define our come on. So there's going to be a little more work involved here. So first thing I'm going to do is define some objects. I'm going to need the UI view controller. That's one, and then an alert controller. Alert controllers can be what our actual toast message is, and we need the view controller to be able to create it. So the first thing we do is get the top level view controller. So it's UI application, shared application, key window, root view controller. And then we create our actual alert. Create our alert controller. It's basically just gonna be an alert with the text. And then we're gonna add an OK button. iOS, you usually don't see toast messages, so you wanna give them a button to tap it to make it go away. But since Android messages shut down by themselves, we're gonna do the same thing here. So first thing I do is I'm going to create a thread. And then define what the thread does. First thing it's going to do, it's going to sleep for 3 seconds. And then we're going to call the iOS invoke on main thread method and call dismiss view controller, which will make our alert controller go away. And then we're just going to stop the thread because we only need it to run once. And then, of course, we're going to fire up the thread. And right after we fire up the thread, we're going to immediately create, well, we already created, we're immediately going to display the alert controller. So by putting that 3-second delay in, we're giving it enough time to throw it up on the screen and give the user a chance to see it. So that's our implementation. So you notice we do not have the dependency attribute. It's done a little differently here. We need to go back to our main app, our shared code, and we're going to go to, oh, that's right. Might as well have, since we're doing the Microsoft extensions, the display thing, need to add the NuGet plugin for that. Otherwise, none of this will work. Oh, sorry. So go to Browse, Microsoft Extensions.Dependency Injection. We want that for the entire project. And we'll install it. And of course, I accept. And yay, we're done. All right, so now what we need to do is go here. And partial pause. We're going to add a reference to an iService provider. This is going to be our hook for getting access to everything that we're injecting into it. And to wire everything up, we need to add a class called Startup. If you've done display injection, if you use the Microsoft dependency injection and ASP.NET Core, then this is all going to be very, very familiar. So we're going to use add a class. We're going to call it Startup. And it's a public static class with one method. It's called init iService collection, so we need to bring that in. We're going to create a new instance of that. Equals new service collection. And we're going to call native configure services with the services. And the way this will work is at startup at the platform level on Android and iOS, they're going to call startup init, and they're going to pass in a method or lambda for the native configure services. And we'll be passing back in our service collection, and it can it can register its implementations then. And then finally, we say app dot service provider equals services dot build service provider. And then finally, the last steps are to call this from the platform level. So let's see, let's bring up app delegate. And there are two different ways of doing it. One way is to define, what did I just do? You can define just a simple method called configure services. It'll get passed in an iService collection, which, let's bring in our friends here. So it gets passed in the services that was created right here. So this guy gets passed into here. It ends up being called in here, which we'll call from our finish launching. And then we call services, add transit, our interface, and our actual implementation. So we have a couple different ways of doing it. You have add transient and add singleton. Add transient, it does exactly what it says it does. When you're done with that toast message, it goes away. If you do it with add singleton, it creates one instance of it and will get used over and over again. There's a third add called add scope, and that's more for ASP.NET, where it creates a singleton, but it's a singleton per thread. So if you're doing on a web server, 5 people hit it, each one gets their own copy of it. And then we can just call it right here. Startup.init, configure services. An alternative way to do that would be to do that as Lambda. So instead of doing, which you could do startup. So this and this are pretty much the same. It's basically whatever style you want to do. Let's keep it simple like that. And then go over to our Android code, which will be in main activity. And it's the same thing. So bring in our namespaces. There we go. And now to call that, we go back to our page, and right after we hide it, we would say app dot service provider get service of type iToast message show toast goodbye keyboard. So you can see it's very similar to how you invoked it with the dependency service. And so now if we run it, as we slowly wait for it to compile. Wait a couple seconds, and goodbye keyboard, which went away by itself. Do that again. I can also tap it to go away. So if we want, come on, go away. Now, if we want to do that on the same thing on Android, because we haven't run that one since the first demo, set up a startup project. The cool thing about doing this, when you do it for Pluralsight or any other recorded video, you can greatly speed this part up so people aren't just staring at a blinking cursor or animated icon. Come on. No errors. It just seems to be taking its sweet time. Oh, there we go. And of course, wait for the app to start up. And here we go. And goodbye keyboard, your typical Android toast message. And let's switch this back. So one thing you can do, let's go back over here. So you can see how these are very similar. We can easily switch our hide keyboard from the dependency service to the Microsoft Extensions dependency injection. We'll just comment that out, and then we'll go to app delegate. So I think we had it. And I can just do, I don't know why I copied that. Add transient. My keyboard helper. Oh. So now if we go back to our thing, we can just say keyboard helper dot hide keyboard. And let's go. I'm going to build errors. Thank you for not picking what I just told you to run on. This should go a little quicker. Build succeeded, of course it did. And it worked just like it did before, because it was the same code. Oh, didn't want to do that. We're just using a different dependency injection system for getting there. So which one would you use? Dependency service or the Microsoft Extensions dependency injection? Dependency service is the out-of-box experience. It does come with Xamarin.Forms. MSDI, very easy to install. Dependency service, easy to use. There's a little more work with the MSDI, but it wasn't that hard. And if you're doing anything in ASP.NET Core, you're already doing it probably. Dependency service is a little less flexible. MSDI is a lot more flexible. Uncertain future. Right now, I've been hearing conflicting messages on whether or not dependency service will be around in the long-term future. The Microsoft Extensions dependency injection isn't going anywhere. It's part of ASP.NET Core, so it's going to be around for a while. So we need to talk about MAUI. MAUI is the .NET multi-platform app UI. This was announced at Build this year. It is the next generation of Xamarin.Forms, and it's going to have breaking changes. Xamarin Essentials becomes system.devices. If you have code that references it as Xamarin Essentials, it should still work. They're using some sort of shim system to make that easier to manage. But I've heard that dependency service is going away, and then I've also heard it's not going away. I think that's still up in the air. There is a good chance that dependency service will not be in MAUI. So MAUI will be in beta at the end of the year, so we'll know then whether dependency service is going away. And it'll be released with .NET 6 in November of 2021. So where to get help? There's online documentation for Essentials. Everything's docs.microsoft.com, and it's Xamarin Essentials. For the device class, it'd be platform device. And then for the Microsoft Extensions Dependency Injection, it's located in the ASP.NET Core Fundamentals Dependency Injection. The source code, Essentials has its own repository. Devices and dependency service are in the Xamarin.Forms repository. And the MSDI is in the Microsoft.com.NET extensions. And if you're like me, you get all your answers from Stack Overflow. So that's also another good place to look. So that's it. That concludes it. But we don't end a presentation without answering questions. Does anyone have any questions about anything we've done?
Yeah, Chris, I have a question.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the dependency injection possibly going away from the Xamarin service. Pardon me.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you happen to know the reason why they're considering removing that potentially?
Code cleanup. They said there were some issues that they wanted to address, and it was I guess there were to get it to work completely. There are things that it does behind the scenes that they just wanted to get away from. However, it looks like they're going back and forth on it, and as of this week, I haven't been able to get a straight answer whether it's going away or not. If it does go away, it's not hard to put into the dependency injection service. I'm sorry, the dependency injection library from Microsoft. That's why I showed that in the last part of the demo, how easy it was to move it from one to the other. I mean, there are going to be breaking changes coming. The degree of it, I'm not sure. If you're using anything in Xamarin.Forms right now that's deprecated, anything that's deprecated right now in Xamarin.Forms 4 will probably be broken on purpose in Xamarin.Forms 5, which will be out sometime, if it's not out now, sometime between now and the end of the year. But this is all preliminary, and we're more than a year away from Maui being released, so all this could change. If I was doing new code right now, I would use the Microsoft Dependency Injection Library over the dependency service. It's just to be safe.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Cool. Does anyone have any other questions? Anything else? Do you want to see anything else back in the code? All right.
One question about the Maui. What's the release date for that?
Maui goes into beta at the end of this year when .NET 5 comes out. General availability, the full release, will be November 2021 when .NET 6 comes out.
Okay.
Great. Okay, thank you, Chris. That was a wonderful presentation. The link has been sent out in the chat feature there for the presentation feedback. Chris, once I get those back, I will aggregate the results and send those to you so you have some feedback.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you very much for letting me speak here tonight.